Afghanistan before 9/11. To truly understand the invasion, we have to look back at the history of Afghanistan. For centuries, Afghanistan had been a crossroads of empires: British, Russian, Persian, and Central Asian. Its rugged, mountains and strategic location made it difficult to conquer, but also extremely important in global politics. In the late 1970s, Afghanistan became the center of Cold War rivalry. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support a communist government that was struggling against resistance fighters. The United States saw this as a golden opportunity. Through the CIA, Washington poured billions of dollars into arming and training the Afghan Mujahideen, local fighters resisting Soviet occupation. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan also played major roles in this support network. After 10 long years of war, the Soviets finally withdrew in 1989, leaving behind a shattered country. But the U.S., having achieved its goal of bleeding the Soviet Union, lost interest and pulled away. Afghanistan was left to civil war. Out of this chaos, the Taliban emerged in the 1990s. They promised stability, strict Islamic rule, and an end to warlordism. By 1996, they controlled most of the country, including Kabul, but their harsh interpretation of Islamic law drew international criticism. At the same time, Afghanistan became a safe haven for foreign militants, including Osama bin Laden, who had fought in the Soviet War and later founded Al-Qaeda. By the late 1990s, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were deeply linked. While the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda used the country as a base for global operations. Chapter 2. The Shock of 9/11. On the morning of September 11, 2001, America woke up to the deadliest terrorist attack in its history. The attackers were 19 men linked to Al-Qaeda. They hijacked 4 commercial airplanes, turning them into weapons. The images of the Twin Towers collapsing became etched into the American consciousness forever. The U.S. was humiliated, shocked, and furious. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the U.S. homeland had been attacked on a massive scale. President George W. Bush declared it an act of war. Almost immediately, intelligence pointed to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda as the perpetrators. And since Al-Qaeda's base was in Afghanistan, America's attention turned toward the Taliban regime. Ultimatum to the Taliban. The U.S. government gave the Taliban a clear ultimatum: hand over Osama bin Laden and dismantle Al-Qaeda bases in Afghanistan, or face military action. But the Taliban hesitated. Their leader, Mullah Omar, demanded evidence of bin Laden's involvement before extraditing him. They also suggested negotiating or sending him to a neutral country for trial. For Washington, this wasn't enough. In the days after 9/11, the American public was in no mood for negotiations. The Bush administration framed the situation in simple terms: either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. When the Taliban refused to comply fully, the decision was made. America would invade Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom, on October 7, 2001, just weeks after 9/11, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom. American warplanes bombed Taliban and Al-Qaeda positions across Afghanistan. Within days, U.S. Special Forces, working with the Northern Alliance, a coalition of Afghan militias opposed to the Taliban, began advancing rapidly. The Taliban government collapsed faster than many expected. Kabul fell in November 2001. By December, Taliban leaders had fled, and Al-Qaeda fighters were on the run in the mountains of Tora Bora. In just a few weeks, America had achieved what seemed like a quick victory. The Taliban were gone, and Al-Qaeda was scattered. But behind this early triumph, a much longer, bloodier story was about to unfold. The inside story, beyond bin Laden. On the surface, America's invasion seemed straightforward: punish those responsible for 9/11 and prevent Afghanistan from being a terrorist haven. But when we dig deeper, we find other motives: hidden, strategic, and long-term. Geopolitical strategy. Afghanistan sits at the heart of Asia, bordering Iran, Pakistan, China, and Central Asia. Controlling Afghanistan meant the U.S. could project influence across a region rich in energy resources. It was a chessboard location in the new 21st century great game. Energy interests. For years before 9/11, U.S. oil companies had eyed Central Asia's vast oil and natural gas reserves. A pipeline project through Afghanistan had been discussed in the 1990s, but stalled due to instability. Some analysts argue that stabilizing Afghanistan under a U.S.-friendly government could revive such projects. Show of force. After 9/11, America wanted to send a clear message. Anyone who attacks the U.S. will face overwhelming military retaliation. The invasion wasn't just about Afghanistan, it was about demonstrating American power to the world, especially to rivals like Iran, Iraq, Russia, and China. The military-industrial complex. Wars are expensive, but for defense contractors, they are also profitable. Billions of dollars would flow into weapons, logistics, and private military contracts. Some critics argue that Afghanistan became part of a larger war economy that benefited certain industries, from victory to quagmire. While the Taliban were ousted quickly, the U.S. faced an unexpected problem. What comes next? The Bush administration shifted its goals from defeating Al-Qaeda to nation-building. They wanted to create a stable, democratic Afghanistan. But Afghanistan's reality, tribal divisions, corruption, poverty, and history of resisting foreign powers made this nearly impossible. Soon, the Taliban regrouped. From safe havens in Pakistan, they launched an insurgency. Suicide bombings, roadside bombs, and guerrilla attacks became common. The war dragged on year after year. American troops, NATO allies, and Afghan civilians paid the price. The quick war had turned into a long, grinding occupation. The role of Pakistan. No discussion of the Afghanistan war is complete without mentioning Pakistan. Officially, Pakistan became a key ally of the United States in the war on terror. After 9/11, Washington pressured Pakistan's military ruler, General Pervez Musharraf, to choose sides. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists, President Bush declared. Musharraf agreed to support the U.S., allowing American forces to use Pakistani airspace and bases. But the reality was far more complicated. While Pakistan cooperated with the U.S., its intelligence agency, the ISI, had deep historical ties to the Taliban. During the 1980s, the ISI had trained and funded Afghan fighters with CIA support. Many of those networks remained intact. As the Taliban regrouped after 2001, many found safe haven across the border in Pakistan. Leaders operated from cities like Quetta, while fighters moved back and forth with relative ease. Washington accused Pakistan of playing a double game, helping the U.S. on one hand, while secretly supporting the Taliban to maintain influence in Afghanistan. For Pakistan, the stakes were high. A strong U.S.-backed Afghan government aligned with India could threaten Pakistan's strategic position. So Islamabad tried to balance its alliance with Washington while keeping ties with the Taliban alive. This uneasy relationship would haunt the war for the next 2 decades. The invasion of Afghanistan wasn't just an American mission. For the first time in history, NATO invoked Article 5 of its charter, declaring that an attack on one member was an attack on all. Troops from Britain, Canada, Germany, France, Australia, and many other countries joined the mission. Initially, there was global sympathy for America. The world saw the 9/11 attacks as an assault on civilization itself. But as the war dragged on, enthusiasm faded. European allies faced mounting casualties and rising public opposition at home. What began as a united front soon turned into frustration with America's strategies and endless demands. Meanwhile, regional powers also kept a close eye on Afghanistan. Iran disliked the Taliban but feared long-term U.S. presence near its borders. Russia worried about U.S. influence in Central Asia, once part of the Soviet Union. India supported the U.S. effort, hoping to reduce Pakistan's influence. China stayed cautious, concerned about instability spilling into its Xinjiang region. Afghanistan had once again become a geopolitical chessboard. Controversies and criticism. As months turned into years, questions began to grow louder. Was the invasion truly about justice, or were there hidden agendas? The Iraq diversion. In 2003, just 2 years after invading Afghanistan, the U.S. launched another war, this time in Iraq. Critics argued that Afghanistan was abandoned too soon. Resources, troops, and attention shifted away, allowing the Taliban to regroup. Some even claimed that Afghanistan had been only the opening move in a larger American plan to dominate the Middle East, human rights and civilian casualties. While the Taliban were brutal, U.S. operations often caused civilian deaths. Airstrikes, drone attacks, and night raids killed thousands of innocent Afghans. This fueled resentment and made it easier for the Taliban to recruit new fighters. Villages destroyed by bombs created enemies instead of allies. Corruption and failed nation building. Billions of dollars poured into Afghanistan, but much of it disappeared into corruption. Afghan officials enriched themselves while ordinary people remained in poverty. Attempts to build a modern democracy clashed with Afghanistan's tribal and traditional structures. The U.S. struggled to understand local culture, and many projects failed. The war economy. Defense contractors and private military companies made billions from the war. Critics accused the U.S. government of fueling a conflict that benefited corporations more than the Afghan people. For many, Afghanistan symbolized the dark side of the military-industrial complex. The human cost. Behind the politics and strategies were millions of ordinary lives. For the Afghan people, the war was devastating. Entire generations grew up knowing nothing but conflict. Families were displaced, children were orphaned, and farmers lost their land to bombings or fighting. According to estimates, more than 170,000 people, Afghan civilians, soldiers, U.S. and NATO troops, lost their lives during the 20-year war. Millions more were injured or displaced. For American soldiers, Afghanistan became the longest war in U.S. history. More than 2,400 U.S. service members were killed, and tens of thousands returned home with physical and psychological scars. The financial cost was staggering. By some estimates, the U.S. spent over $2 trillion on the war. That money could have been used for education, healthcare, or infrastructure, but instead, it vanished into 2 decades of conflict. The Taliban's resurgence. Despite America's vast military power, the Taliban never truly disappeared. They played the long game, waiting out the U.S. in rural areas. They built networks, enforced shadow governments, and gained support from Afghans tired of corruption and foreign occupation. By the late 2000s, the Taliban were back as a major force. Even with over 100,000 U.S. troops deployed at the peak, America could not defeat them. The rugged terrain, porous Pakistan border, and local support made them nearly impossible to eliminate. The longer the war lasted, the clearer it became military might alone could not solve Afghanistan. The legacy of the invasion. So why did America invade Afghanistan? The official answer was clear: to destroy Al-Qaeda and bring justice for 9/11, but the legacy shows a more complicated truth. Al-Qaeda weakened but not destroyed. Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, in Pakistan, not Afghanistan. Other terrorist groups continued to exist. The Taliban removed, then returned. Despite 2 decades of war, the Taliban eventually regained power in 2021, almost exactly as they had before. America's reputation questioned. The invasion initially gained sympathy but later fueled anti-American sentiment worldwide. Trillions spent, little achieved. For many, Afghanistan became the symbol of a failed war, long, costly, and without clear victory.